Welcome to Sacred Harmony, where we explore the quiet places within us and the wisdom that emerges when life interrupts our plans. Today, we meet Sylvia Wolfer, a guide shaped by profound loss and deep inquiry. Having lived through the sudden passing of her parents and two brothers, Sylvia now weaves neuroscience, mindfulness, and movement into a compassionate roadmap for navigating grief. Her work reminds us that grief isn't just emotional, it reshapes the nervous system, identity, and our relationship with meaning itself. We walk gently into the terrain and discover what steadiness can feel like on the other side of profound change. Welcome to the show, Sylvia. It's such an honor to have you.
Thank you so much, Anya, for having me. I'm delighted to be here with you today.
So, Sylvia, you have experienced loss repeatedly and suddenly. How does grief change the inner landscape of a person in ways that might not recognize at first?
Yes, grief really strips you down to your inner self. It's like mindfulness, but hardcore. So when grief hits you, everything else stops suddenly, and you're faced with your deepest fears, with the most painful experience emotionally that you ever had. And it's something that no one really prepares us for, sadly, because grief is something we will all experience. Unless we die young, everyone will grieve at some point in their life. We will all lose someone that we love. And this is why I think it's important to talk about it so that people are a little less, not overwhelmed. You'll always be overwhelmed, but maybe a little bit prepared, have an idea of what this feels like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. And what subtle internal signals often show someone that their nervous system is overwhelmed rather than just emotional?
Yes, so that's a really good question. You see, the thing is that it kind of creeps in slowly. So you don't necessarily realize it at first. It's over the years, over time, when everyone else thinks you're back to normal, you're fine, because to the outside world, you're functioning, you're looking after your children, you're working, you're doing all the things that life requires from you. But somewhere inside, your nervous system is still on alert. So for example, you will struggle to sleep, or your appetite will be disrupted, or you will feel threatened. You will be very nervous in circumstances where you normally wouldn't be. Or if something little happens, like spilling your coffee in the morning, you're going to end up in tears as if the world had just crumbled. So it's getting a bit disproportional. So it's all these little signs of emotional exhaustion. And I always say to my clients, there's one sign that I find is really obvious and that we don't always notice. It's when it feels like your life is shrinking. Suddenly your life seems smaller because you don't have the energy or the willingness or the courage to do things that used to be easy, that suddenly they become so difficult that you do way less and your life shrinks. You see less people, you have less activities, you feel less joy, you have less willingness to go out. So when life shrinks, that is a big sign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And many listeners may have mistaken these signals for weakness, and your clarity can help them see that it is as biology, not personal failure.
Yes, that's exactly it. There is no weakness with that. And I think it's important that we learn to listen to the signals without judgment. And this is very difficult because we judge ourselves without even realizing it. We're very quick to think, oh, but this is ridiculous. Why do I feel like that? Come on, get yourself together. You just split the coffee. It's no big deal. Come on, like you should be over it now. You should be, so we're very quick to judge ourselves where we actually should be much kinder and try to understand, try to be like, "Oh, okay. Why why am I reacting so strongly right now? Why is there a disproportion between what actually happened and my reaction? Why am I so tired? Why does my body need more rest? Why do I not have the energy to go to the gym?" So in my case, for example, I love training and I've always trained. And training hard, lifting weights, or going for runs has always been something that was very beneficial to me. But after my brother died a few years ago, I kept pushing myself and I was hard on myself, thinking, come on, but just don't be so lazy. Just go and do your training. But because my body was grieving, it was backfiring. I was exhausting a body that was already exhausted, and I wasn't being kind enough to just give my body the rest that it needed. So I think it's important that we strip away judgment and that we just observe and listen and just acknowledge, okay, this is how I feel today. Not even trying to fix it necessarily, but just allow it to happen. I'm tired. Well, there's nothing wrong with being tired. I shouldn't judge myself and feel lazy. I shouldn't be embarrassed because I slept 8 hours and I should be, fit and happy, but I'm not. So, this is an important point to really be an observer and be kind, like you would be with a child. You wouldn't say to a child, "What do you mean you're tired?" Like, you shouldn't be tired. You acknowledge what they say, and that's how we should treat ourselves, especially in grief.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And you blend neuroscience and mindfulness in your work. How do these two worlds come together to explain what grief does to the nervous system?
Yes, so we basically have a three-dimensional map in the brain. For every relationship we have three factors that will define that relationship. So we have time, space, and then the bond itself. So to give you an example, if I talk to you about someone dear to you, let's say your mom, for example, if you still have your mom, well, you will know where your mom is right now. You know where she is in space, and you will know roughly when you are going to see her again or when you will get in touch with her again. If you ask a parent, where are your children? They will know exactly where they are and when they are going to see them again. So this is a map we have in our brain. And of course, we have the bond. We love them dearly. You don't have the same bond with your mom than you have with the barista who makes your favorite coffee. So it might be someone important because you see your barista every day. But if you don't see your barista for 2 weeks, you're not going to be worried because he's not in the map of your brain. Your mom is, but the barista is not. So we have that three dimension in the relationship. And when someone dies, these two dimensions of time and space collapse. And this is very hard for the brain to register because in the brain, this map is still accurate. But in real life, it's no longer here. So we would expect, for example, if it's a husband who died, for the husband to come home at 6 p.m. in the evening, like he always did. And then we expect to hear the door, but we don't. And then when we don't hear the door, there is that mismatch between the map in the brain and the actual reality. And then there is a wave of grief that hits you and makes it really hard. And the problem is that most people do not know that, and then they blame themselves. They feel like, am I stupid? Well, I know he's not going to come back. So why am I expecting to hear the key in the door? And that's the thing where explaining the neuroscience helps people make sense of what is actually going on and understanding that they're not crazy. There is nothing wrong with them. It is a mechanism, and it's about relearning that the time and the space are no longer here, but the bond is still there. So this is the important part in my work, is to maintain what is there, the relationship, the love, and to teach the brain that the space and time are not part of the equation anymore. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, 100%. And is there a scientific insight that, once understood, helps people feel less afraid of their own reactions?
Yes, yes, there's a lot of data in science actually about this. And as a rule of thumb, in life, when we understand a mechanism, it's makes it more manageable. If you understand that, I'll give you this as an example, that if you go to the gym and you train really hard, you might be in pain the next day, but the pain will not scare you because you will understand that there is a reason for it. Whereas if you didn't know why you have sore muscles, you might be panicking. You might think, oh my God, what is wrong with me? Have I damaged myself? So understanding what is going on makes it more manageable. And then it is less overwhelming. And it's the first step towards regaining agency a little bit, because grief changes everything. And grief is like a hurricane in someone's life. And especially over time, I find, I mean, the first year is very, very difficult. But then comes the time where everyone goes back to their lives. Everyone thinks you are back to your life, but you're still very much on edge. And triggers can be very debilitating. You can walk into a cafe and hear a song, and you crumble and you can't hold it together. So if you know how your brain functions, you can then work with it instead of against it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this kind of understanding can be liberating. It replaces shame with self compassion.
That's exactly it. You phrase it beautifully. It replaces shame with self-compassion. Yes, and that is applicable to anything in life really. When we get to that point where we can give ourselves the kindness that we so easily give to our loved ones, things get a bit easier.
Yeah, definitely. And movement, especially mindful practices like Pilates, play a role in your approach. How
Yes.
does physical movement support emotional steadiness during grief?
Yes. So that is also a really good question because the mind and the body, it's not just that they are linked, because when we talk about a mind body connection, it sounds like there are two entities that come together. It's actually a unit. Mind and body, they work together. So whenever the mind is overwhelmed, we can always go to the body to calm the mind. So, if even, let's say, even without talking about grief, if you feel very angry or very nervous or very overwhelmed, and someone says to you, you need to calm down, you need to calm down, that's gonna make it worse, you know? But if you start breathing, breathing is the primal movement, breath is movement. If you start breathing, then you will be able to calm down. So by soothing the body, we help the mind and the grieving heart. So there are some movements by moving slowly, and there are some positions that signal safety to the brain. In yoga, after yoga practice, there's quite often a shavasana where people lie on their back with their palms facing up, and they're exposing their chest and their belly. And this is a position that signals to the brain, I am safe. I am safe because I can lie here. I'm not worried that anything is going to happen to me. And so this is one thing that helps. And the other one is in Pilates in particular, that slow movement paired with breathing helps you focus on something else, because the thoughts are just constantly going. You cannot stop your brain. We can never stop the brain from thinking, but we can channel our thoughts. It's a little bit like mindfulness. But when you're grieving, sitting down and meditating can be very triggering, can be very overwhelming. So moving slowly is a kind of movement mindfulness where you focus on where you place your feet, where you feel it in your body. And in that sense, it helps again to signal safety to the brain and also to channel the thoughts so that they get away a little bit from grief.
Mm-hmm. Yes, totally. And what's a simple movement or grounding practice someone can start with on difficult days?
Yeah, so you can, for example, simply roll the shoulders backwards and forwards and move your head a little bit from side to side, and just being aware. Sometimes it's enough to be standing and just feel the feet on the ground, feel the weight of the body on the ground. You can do a few stretches that feel comfortable, whatever feels good, where you get good feedback from the body. And if moving at all feels too overwhelming, because there are days like this, breathe. Try to breathe. Place a hand on your belly and try to push your belly button against your hand so that you really get into that deep belly breathing. But you can also do a few cat cows or rest a little bit in your child's pose, like gentle, slow, safe movement where you try to breathe as you move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and hearing this helps listeners feel that healing isn't about grand gestures, but small embodied choices.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And there is one thing that I've applied to myself and I recommend to anyone I work with really. It's to start with the body. The body is extremely important. And if your body feels safe, slowly your heart and your mind will follow. And if your body is healthy, the rest will also slowly follow. And quite often in grief, we neglect the body because we lose that connection. So the appetite is completely disrupted, sleep is disrupted, even the sensations of cold or heat are disrupted, the immune system is affected. So the body is easily neglected. Sometimes people start drinking even, or they don't eat properly anymore. So what I would recommend is to really do simple things but to do them over and over again, like eating real foods, whole foods, making sure we are hydrated enough, drinking enough, sleeping as well as we can. I know it's really hard to sleep well, but try to implement a bedtime routine to just help your body sleep as well as what is accessible. Something like getting morning daylight, because it helps your brain to produce melatonin roughly 15 hours later. So it will also help you with your wake sleep pattern, which is completely disrupted during grief. And then, last but not least, surround yourself with people that feel calm and reassuring. Try to avoid people who stress you. And even if they are your best friends or your parents, or just listen to yourself and surround yourself with people who feel good and safe. But tend to your body. Sometimes, everything else is too complicated. Start with that. Lisa Feldman Barrett is a scientist specialized in emotions, and she talks about the body budget. And sometimes we feel low, we feel sad, not because there's anything wrong, but simply because we're dehydrated or we didn't sleep enough. And I mean, we've all experienced that. We're not the same joyful selves when we haven't had a good night of sleep, right? So the body budget is something to tend to, and sometimes it's just more accessible than, like you said, anything, big or huge or complicated. Just that. Look after your body in a simple way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And also, grief often brings moments where identity feels shaken. How can someone begin reconnecting with meaning when the world feels unfamiliar or unsafe?
Yes, well, it does take time, and you're right. Um, it can really shift your sense of identity, because quite often your identity also was linked to the relationship and to the person. In a couple, for example, if one dies, the other one has to rebuild their identity. They're no longer part of this couple. It's the same for parents losing a child. And sometimes, if it was their only child, suddenly they're no parents anymore. So this is a very challenging part of grief, and this is where connections will help. To really surround yourself with people that make you feel good, and learning, like I said at the beginning, to listen to yourself, because this will also help you understand who you truly are. When you stop doing things you think others expect from you or society expect from you, when you really start taking time to listen to your wants and needs, you start to understand yourself again. And then there is also ways where you can, keep the other person alive and take them into your, not identity, but your way of being. You can, for example, if you lose some, like my brother, for example, was extremely, he was super friendly, and he would just talk to anyone and laugh with anyone. So I'm making a conscious effort to do that when I go to the stores, when I'm at the supermarket. I'm just trying, to be a bit more engaging, and this is my way of honoring him, and keeping him in my ways of living. So this also helps sometimes with finding your identity again.
Mm-hmm. Yes, 100%. And also, have you found that meaning returns gradually, or does it arrive in unexpected flashes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, grief is universal. Everyone experiences grief, yet it is a very personal experience as well. And everyone will have their own definition. Everyone will have their own process, their own healing process. Um, and I think what the important message here would be that meaning can come back, and joy can come back, and grief and joy can live together. So it's more than how does it come back, it's more that it will come back. There will be a time where it will come back, but grief never really goes away. Grief is like a wound, a big wound. And if you don't tend to the wound, it will fester. It will not just heal on its own. It doesn't just go away like that with time. This is a delusion. it needs to be tended to and cared for, like you would care for a wound. And then it will leave a scar. And the scar will always be a bit tender, but you will be able to live with your scar. And sometimes if something touches the scar, it will be more painful than if it touched something else. So it will always be there, but it will then become part of us and also shape us. Grief also brings a lot of learnings and can, grief reminds us of what is important. It teaches you to tell the people you love that you love them. Grief very often makes us better people because we're just more aware of how fragile life is and and what a privilege it is to be alive. My friends always say, "Oh, how do you handle aging? Like now we have these wrinkles," and I always feel like aging is a privilege because I'm already older than my dad and my two brothers ever got to be. So grief is also a teacher of very meaningful things. It's the toughest teacher of all, but maybe also the best teacher. And this is how meaning comes back, because it teaches you, it brings you back to the essentials.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, these reflections allow listeners to trust their own rhythms rather than forcing themselves into timelines.
Yes, there is no right, no wrong. It does take time, a lot of time. It takes much longer that people who haven't experienced grief would imagine. When when you're grieving hard and you think about, like last month, it was 6 years that my brother died, and 6 years might seem like a long time for someone who's never lost a loved one, but it's still so raw. It's still so present. So one of the lessons, unexpected lessons of grief for me was that the intensity of the pain never goes away. When I was younger, I had that idea that it fades with time. It does not fade with time. What changes is the rhythm, so the frequency. At the beginning, you're suffering all the time. And then over time, the episodes of grief are less regular. But when they happen, they're still intense. So grief will always be a part of it. And it's something that can be learned to live with grief and joy. They live hand in hand, they live together. And usually, we grieve because we loved. Grief is love that has nowhere to go. If there was no love, there is no grief. So hope and grief can be together. One of my clients said recently to me, I never thought I would be hopeful again. I was so sad. I never thought I would be hopeful again. And then we did that work together, and she said, I have a hope now again. I have hope that life can be beautiful again. And this is wonderful, but when you're in the midst of grief, it feels like you're never going to get out of it. And this is why the discussion about grief is important, that we bring it out to the world to stop that or reduce the loneliness that is associated to grief so that other grieving hearts feel seen and heard as well and see that it is possible to have both grief and joy in our life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, 100%. And also, many people feel isolated in grief because they don't know how to talk about it. How can we cultivate more compassionate conversations around loss?
Yes, that's true. Grief is very isolating because very often people don't know what to say. They're worried they might create more pain, they're worried they might say the wrong thing. What I would recommend is to go above the potential discomfort that this conversation can bring. Brene Brown says when you're given the choice between doing what's comfortable and what's right, you must do what's right. And if you think it's uncomfortable to talk to someone who's grieving, don't think about your discomfort, think about theirs. And even if they say to you, just leave me alone, at least you will have given them a chance to express themselves, because even that feels like a relief sometimes to be able to say, I don't want to talk about it, but someone needs to ask in the first place. So think about the other person. If someone is grieving around you, think about them and more than about your discomfort in that moment. And presence doesn't always need to be words or conversations. You can be here by taking care of the laundry for a week or preparing meals for them to freeze or, doing like these or watering the plants in the garden. There are many ways to be present for people who grieve, but just do something to be there for them, because for the person who's grieving is so lost. They don't know what they need. They cannot phrase it. They cannot say, help me or do this or do that. So if you have someone who is grieving, just go and talk to them and do something for them, whatever it is. Even if they tell you it's wrong, at least you will have done something.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. And also, your insights here can help listeners show up for others with greater sensitivity and presence.
Yes, grief can be very lonely, and I completely understand that it can be intimidating to start a conversation. I get that, and even when I was grieving, my younger brother died when I was 17, and I felt very very lonely very often because I was a teenager and my teenage friends they didn't know how to bring it up. And I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable. And so I was very lonely in my grief, and I wasn't mad at them. I did understand that they didn't know how to bring it up. But I think this just shows how much we need to open up the conversation and to also offer systems, to put systems in place where people can open up and talk and share. Grief is still not really recognized. I work in the UK, and grief costs the UK economy £23 billion a year, which is huge, So it is a real issue that needs to be addressed, not just on a personal level, but also on a national level.
Mm. Yes, I absolutely agree. Sylvia, thank you so much for bringing up such grounded honesty and gentle wisdom into this space. And to everyone listening, may this conversation remind you that grief is not a rupture you must rush to repair. It's a landscape you learn to walk with tenderness. Take one quiet moment today to breathe, feel your body, and acknowledge weather has been heavy. Steadiness doesn't appear all at once. It grows each time you choose to meet yourself with care.